The dining room of the Mitchell family home had never felt so small. Emma Mitchell sat with her back rigid against the mahogany chair as the family lawyer, Mr. Peterson, adjusted his glasses and cleared his throat. Through the large bay windows, she could see the garden her father had tended for 40 years, roses still blooming despite his absence. As per the last will and testament of Harold Mitchell, Mr. Peterson began, his voice steady and practiced. The family home at 47 Oakwood Drive shall be given to my daughter, Emma Mitchell. Emma felt her brother Daniel's eyes burning into her from across the table. His knuckles had gone white around his coffee mug. The summer cottage in Cape Cod and its contents are bequeathed to my son, Daniel Mitchell. Daniel's jaw tightened. The cottage was worth maybe a quarter of the house, and everyone knew it. My savings and investments, totaling approximately $780,000, are to be divided equally between my children, Emma and Daniel Mitchell. Mr. Peterson continued reading through various smaller bequests. Dad's fishing gear to his old friend Tom, his vintage record collection to a cousin in Boston, but Emma could barely focus. She'd known this would be difficult, but the tension crackling across the table was worse than she'd imagined. When Mr. Peterson folded the will and tucked it into his briefcase, the silence that followed felt like a physical presence. "That's it," Daniel finally said, his voice cutting through the quiet. "Dad leaves me the summer shack we visited twice a year, while Emma gets the house we grew up in, the house that Mom helped design." "Daniel," Emma began, but he cut her off with a sharp look. "Don't Daniel me. You've been whispering in his ear for years, especially after Mom died. Always the dutiful daughter, weren't you? Never moved more than 10 miles away, always available for Sunday dinners." Emma flinched. "That's not fair, isn't it?" Daniel stood up, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor. "I was building a career, Emma. I couldn't just drop everything and come running every time he called." "He only called when he really needed help," Emma replied, fighting to keep her voice level. "And it wasn't that often." Mr. Peterson cleared his throat awkwardly. "Perhaps I should leave you two to discuss." "There's nothing to discuss," Daniel snapped. "This is exactly what I expected. Dad always favored Emma. Always." The accusation stung. "That's not true," Emma said. "You know how proud he was of you. He kept every article about your firm framed in his study." Daniel laughed, a harsh sound without humor. "What good are frames on a wall when actions speak so much louder?" "He left you the house, Emma. The house our family built together." Emma felt tears threatening, but blinked them back. "I was the one who took care of him during chemo, Daniel. I was the one who drove him to appointments, who sat with him through the nights when the pain was too much. Because I live in Chicago, what was I supposed to do? Abandon my clients, my responsibilities? You could have visited more than twice a year." The words hung in the air between them. Daniel's face flushed, and for a moment, Emma thought he might shout back. Instead, he grabbed his jacket from the back of his chair. "I have a flight to catch," he said coldly. "I'll have my lawyer contact you about the estate division. Clearly, we can't handle this like adults." "Daniel, please." But he was already striding toward the door, leaving Emma alone with Mr. Peterson, who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else in the world. After the lawyer left, Emma wandered through the empty house, the house that was now hers, technically, though it didn't feel like a victory. She paused in her father's study, where the afternoon sun illuminated dust motes dancing in the air. It had been 3 weeks since the funeral. 3 weeks of sorting through Dad's belongings, of accepting casseroles from neighbors, of fielding calls from relatives. Daniel had stayed for the funeral and left the next day, citing work commitments. He'd barely looked at her as he drove away. She sank into her father's leather chair and ran her fingers over the worn armrests. The study smelled like him still, old books and the pipe tobacco he'd given up years ago but kept around because he liked the scent. On the desk sat a framed photo of the whole family, taken on vacation in Cape Cod 15 years ago. Mom was still alive then, smiling with an arm around each of her children. Dad stood behind them all, looking proud and content. Emma picked up the photo, studying her brother's teenage face. When had things gone so wrong between them? Was it when he left for college while she stayed local? When Mom got sick and Emma took on the bulk of her care? Or was it more gradual, a slow accumulation of distance and resentment, geography, and choices pulling them in different directions? She set the photo down and opened the desk drawer, looking for a notepad. Instead, She found a thick manila envelope with her name written on it in her father's shaky handwriting. Curious, she opened it to find a letter and a small key she didn't recognize. "Dear Emma," the letter began. "If you're reading this, then Mr. Peterson has already read the will, and I imagine your brother isn't taking it well." Emma let out a startled laugh. Even from beyond the grave, Dad knew exactly what would happen. "I need to explain some things that aren't in the official will," the letter continued. "Things I couldn't say while I was alive because they involve promises I made to your mother before she died. The key enclosed opens the safe behind the painting in my bedroom. Inside, you'll find everything you need to understand. But Emma, this puts a heavy responsibility on your shoulders. You'll need to decide what to tell Daniel and when. I trust you'll make the right choice, as you always have." The letter ended with, "I love you both, more than either of you will ever know." Emma sat back, the key clutched in her palm. What could be so important that Dad kept it locked away? What promises had he made to Mom? And why was it now her responsibility to decide what Daniel should know? She thought of her brother's anger, his hurt, his certainty that he'd been treated unfairly. She thought of the years of distance between them, widening with each holiday missed, each phone call shortened. Her father had always taught them that family was everything, the one anchor in a stormy world. Yet here they were, broken apart over material things, over misunderstandings and absence. Emma tucked the letter back into its envelope and stood up. Whatever was in that safe, whatever secrets her parents had kept, she needed to know. And then, somehow, she needed to find a way to reach her brother before the rift between them became permanent. She walked slowly up the stairs to her father's bedroom, the key heavy in her hand, wondering what truths waited to be uncovered and whether they would heal her family or break it beyond repair. The safe behind her father's bedroom painting was small but substantial, its metal face cool under Emma's fingertips as she inserted the key. It took some jiggling. The mechanism was old, but eventually, she heard a satisfying click. Inside lay a leather-bound notebook, several folded documents, and an old USB drive that looked like it hadn't been touched in years. Emma took everything to the kitchen table and spread it out before her. She started with the notebook, recognizing her father's neat, measured handwriting. The first page was dated 12 years ago, shortly after her mother's cancer diagnosis. "Margaret wants me to protect them both," her father had written. "But I don't know if that's possible anymore. The truth has a way of surfacing, no matter how deep you bury it." Emma's stomach tightened. She flipped through more pages, finding financial records, medical notes from her mother's illness, and then a series of letters. Not to her or Daniel, but to someone named Thomas Ryder. The name wasn't familiar, but as Emma read through the correspondence, the kitchen seemed to grow colder. Thomas Ryder had apparently worked with her father at his engineering firm in the 80s. And according to these letters, Thomas was also Daniel's biological father. "It can't be," Emma whispered to the empty room. But the evidence was right there. DNA test results from when Daniel was a baby, legal documents her father had drawn up but never filed, draft letters to Daniel that had never been sent. Her father had known for decades that Daniel wasn't his biological son, yet he'd raised him as his own, never breathing a word of it to anyone except, apparently, her mother. Emma pushed back from the table, her mind racing. This explained the will, why her father had left the family home to her while giving Daniel the cottage and half the money. Her father hadn't been playing favorites. He'd been navigating an impossible situation, trying to honor both his children while acknowledging a truth he'd never had the courage to reveal. The question now was, what should she do with this information? Daniel already resented her. If she told him about his parentage now, in the midst of their inheritance dispute, he'd likely see it as a convenient excuse for why he'd gotten less than she had. He might think she was making it up to justify their father's decision. Or worse, he might believe it and feel even more betrayed, not just by their father now, but by their mother too, and by the very foundation of his identity. But keeping this secret felt wrong too. Daniel had a right to know where he came from. And these documents raised other questions. Was Thomas Ryder still alive? Did he know about Daniel? Had he ever tried to make contact? Emma was still lost in thought when her phone buzzed with a text. It was from Daniel's wife, Natalie. Just landed in Boston, it read. Daniel decided to come back to clear his things from the cottage. He's still upset. Thought you should know. Emma's heart raced. Daniel was coming back. Today. And now she was sitting at their father's kitchen table, surrounded by proof that everything Daniel thought he knew about himself was a lie. She texted back a quick, "Thanks for letting me know," and started gathering the documents, trying to decide what to do. Hide everything and pretend she never found it? Tell Daniel immediately? Wait for a better moment, if such a thing existed? Before she could decide, she heard the crunch of tires on the gravel driveway. Peering through the kitchen window, she saw Daniel's rental car pulling up. He was already here. Emma quickly stuffed everything back into the safe and returned it to its place behind the painting, her hands shaking. She barely made it downstairs before Daniel let himself in the front door, not bothering to knock. "I forgot my laptop charger," he said by way of greeting. "It's probably in Dad's study." "Daniel," Emma started, not sure what she was going to say next. But her brother was already striding past her toward the study, his posture rigid with anger. She followed him, watching as he rifled through his overnight bag that still sat beside the desk where he'd left it after the funeral. "Found it," he said, holding up the charger. He moved to leave, but Emma stood in the doorway. "Can we talk?" she asked. "Please? I hate how we left things." Daniel sighed, running a hand through his hair, a gesture so like their father that Emma almost gasped. "What's there to talk about, Em? Dad made his choices. You got the better deal. End of story." "It's not that simple," Emma replied. "There were reasons." "Reasons?" Daniel laughed bitterly. "Like what? That I moved away? That I didn't put my entire life on hold to be his caretaker? Some of us have responsibilities, Emma. Some of us built lives beyond this house." Emma flinched at the implication that she hadn't built a life of her own. "That's not fair," she said quietly. "I made choices too. I chose to be here. That doesn't make my life less valuable than yours." Something in her tone must have gotten through, because Daniel's expression softened slightly. He sank into the desk chair. "I know," he admitted. "I know you sacrificed a lot. I feel like I've been pushed out of this family bit by bit, year by year. First when Mom got sick and I was away at college, then when I moved to Chicago for work, then when Dad." He trailed off, swallowing hard. "When Dad what?" Emma prompted. "When Dad stopped calling," Daniel finished. "About 5 years ago, the calls got less frequent. When I'd call him, he seemed distant. I thought he was disappointed in me, or that he was just getting older, more forgetful. But now I wonder if he was already planning to cut me out of my inheritance." Emma felt a surge of protectiveness toward their father. "He wasn't cutting you out," she insisted. "He loved you. He was proud of you." "Then why?" Daniel demanded, his voice cracking. "Why leave you the house? Why leave me the cottage that he knew I could never use? Living halfway across the country with a job that barely gives me 2 weeks of vacation a year." Emma hesitated. The truth was right there, locked in the safe upstairs. But how could she tell him? How could she shatter his world when he was already hurting so much? "I don't know," she said finally. "But I know he had his reasons, and they weren't about loving you less. I swear it." Daniel studied her face. "You're keeping something from me," he said suddenly. "You've got that same look you had when you broke Mom's vase in 7th grade and tried to blame the cat." Despite everything, Emma almost smiled. It was such a Daniel thing to say. Observant, cutting right to the core, remembering details no one else would. "There are some things I'm still figuring out," she admitted carefully. "About Dad's decision. About our family." Daniel stood up, his eyes never leaving hers. "What things? What aren't you telling me, Emma?" The moment stretched between them, taut with possibility. Emma thought of the DNA test results upstairs, of the letters to Thomas Ryder, of her father's agonized journal entries about keeping a secret that wasn't his to tell. She thought of how much Daniel had already lost, first their mother, then their father, and now, in his eyes, his rightful place in the family legacy. "Daniel," she began, her voice barely above a whisper, "what would you say if I told you Dad left me the house because he wasn't sure if he had the right to leave it to you?" Daniel's brow furrowed. "What are you talking about? Of course he had the right. He owned it." "That's not what I mean," Emma said, her heart pounding so hard she was sure he could hear it. "I mean, Dad wasn't sure if he should leave you the family home because—" She took a deep breath. "Because biologically, you might not be part of the Mitchell family." The silence that followed her words was absolute. Daniel stared at her, his face draining of color. "What the hell are you saying?" he finally managed, his voice dangerously quiet. Emma reached for his arm, but he jerked away. "I found some documents," she explained hurriedly. In Dad's safe. Letters, test results. Mom, before she got married to Dad, she was involved with someone else. His name was Thomas Ryder. He worked with Dad. No, Daniel said, shaking his head. No, you're making this up. This is just a sick way to justify getting the house. I'm not making it up, Emma insisted. I wish I was. Dad kept everything. The DNA test, letters he drafted to you but never sent, journal entries about how torn he was. He raised you as his son, Daniel. He loved you as his son. But legally, he wasn't sure what was right. Daniel backed away from her, his face a mask of shock and betrayal. Show me, he demanded. Show me these supposed documents. Emma hesitated only a moment before nodding. They're upstairs, in the safe behind his bedroom painting. Daniel was already moving, taking the stairs 2 at a time. Emma followed, her stomach in knots. This wasn't how she'd wanted to tell him. She'd had no time to prepare, to think about how to soften the blow. By the time she reached the bedroom, Daniel had already moved the painting aside, revealing the small safe. Open it, he commanded. With trembling fingers, Emma inserted the key and opened the safe. She handed Daniel the leather journal first, open to the page where their father had written about Margaret's wish to protect them both. As Daniel read, his expression hardened. He silently took each document Emma handed him, the DNA results, the letters, the legal notes. When he'd seen it all, he carefully placed everything back in the safe and shut it. So, he said, his voice eerily calm, my entire life has been a lie. No, Emma protested. No, Daniel. Dad loved you. He chose you. He chose to lie to me. Daniel shouted, his composure finally breaking. My whole life, he let me believe I was his son. And Mom, his voice caught. Mom died knowing she'd never told me the truth. They were trying to protect you, Emma said softly. Protect me. Daniel laughed, a harsh, broken sound. By letting me find out like this, after they're both gone, after I've spent my entire adult life trying to make Dad proud, trying to be worthy of the Mitchell name, a name that isn't even mine. Emma had no answer for that. She watched helplessly as her brother, because no matter what the DNA said, that's what he was, paced the room, running his hands through his hair, his breathing ragged. I need to go, he said abruptly. I need to think. Daniel, please, Emma begged. Don't leave like this. Talk to me. We can figure this out together. But Daniel was already moving past her, down the stairs, grabbing his jacket and keys. Daniel, Emma called, following him to the front door. Where are you going? He paused at the threshold, his back to her. To the cottage, he said dully. To pack up what's mine. Or what Dad decided was mine anyway. The door closed behind him with a finality that made Emma's heart sink. She leaned against it, sliding down until she sat on the floor, tears streaming down her face. What had she done? In trying to explain their father's decision, had she just made everything infinitely worse? Had she just lost her brother forever? 3 days passed without a word from Daniel. Emma called and texted, but her messages went unanswered. Natalie texted once to say they were still at the cottage and Daniel needed space. Emma tried to respect that, but the silence was unbearable. She spent the time going through more of her father's papers, trying to piece together the full story. From what she could gather, her mother had been involved with Thomas Ryder briefly before meeting her father. When she discovered she was pregnant, she wasn't certain who the father was, but she chose Harold Mitchell, the man she truly loved. They married quickly, and Daniel was born 7 months later. A paternity test when Daniel was still an infant confirmed what Margaret had suspected. Harold wasn't the biological father. But by then, Harold had already fallen in love with the baby boy he considered his son. According to his journal, he'd made a pact with Margaret to raise Daniel as their own and never reveal the truth. And they'd kept that promise for over 40 years. What troubled Emma most were the entries from the last few years of her father's life. He'd apparently tracked down Thomas Ryder, discovering he still lived in Massachusetts, just an hour's drive away. He'd even drafted several letters to him, but never sent them. In his final journal entry, dated just 2 months before his death, her father had written, "The truth has weighed on me all these years. Soon, I'll have to trust Emma to decide what's right. She always had the most compassionate heart of anyone I've ever known." The responsibility felt crushing. How was she supposed to know what was right? How could she possibly fix what had been broken between her and Daniel? let alone help him process a revelation that changed his entire identity. On the fourth day, Emma made a decision. She couldn't force Daniel to talk to her, but she could at least try to get a more complete picture. She found Thomas Ryder's address in her father's papers and drove to the small coastal town where he lived. Ryder's house was a modest Cape Cod with blue shutters and a neatly maintained garden. Emma sat in her car for nearly 20 minutes, working up the courage to knock on the door. What would she even say? "Hello, I think you might be my brother's biological father. Did you know?" Finally, she forced herself to approach the house and ring the doorbell. A moment later, the door opened to reveal a man in his late 60s with salt and pepper hair and eyes that were startlingly familiar. Daniel's eyes. "Can I help you?" he asked, his tone friendly but curious. Emma swallowed hard. "Mr. Ryder? My name is Emma Mitchell. I believe you knew my parents, Harold and Margaret Mitchell." The man's expression changed instantly, a flash of recognition, followed by something like apprehension. "Yes," he said carefully. "I knew them many years ago. Harold and I worked together at Baxter Engineering." Emma nodded. "May I come in? There's something I need to discuss with you." Thomas hesitated, then stepped back to let her enter. His living room was comfortably furnished, with bookshelves lining one wall and large windows overlooking the ocean. He gestured for Emma to sit on the sofa while he took an armchair opposite. "I assume this is about Daniel," he said quietly before Emma could begin. She stared at him, momentarily speechless. "You know? About Daniel being your son," Thomas finished. "Yes, I've known for a long time. But how? My parents never told anyone." Thomas sighed, running a hand through his hair, the same gesture Daniel made when he was stressed. "Your father came to see me about 5 years ago," he explained. "He said he was dying, that he'd been diagnosed with cancer, and that before he went, he needed to make peace with the past. He told me about Daniel, showed me pictures, said he'd raised him as his own and never regretted it for a moment." Emma tried to process this. "Dad never mentioned visiting you," she said. "Not to me, not in his journal. He made me promise not to reach out to Daniel unless Daniel came to me first," Thomas continued. "He said it should be Daniel's choice whether to know the truth." I agreed. Harold had been Daniel's father in all the ways that mattered. I had no right to disrupt that. "But now Daniel knows," Emma said. "I found Dad's papers, the DNA test, everything. I told Daniel, and now he won't speak to me. He's devastated." Thomas's face fell. "I'm sorry," he said. "That must have been incredibly difficult for both of you." Emma fought back tears. "I don't know what to do. He's staying at our family's cottage in Cape Cod, but he won't answer my calls. I thought maybe if I understood more about you, about what happened, I could somehow help him make sense of it all." Thomas was quiet for a moment, looking out at the ocean. "I can tell you my side," he finally said, "for whatever it's worth." He told Emma about meeting Margaret at a company Christmas party. Harold had brought her as his girlfriend, but they'd had a fight that night, and she'd left upset. Thomas had offered to drive her home, and one thing led to another. It was a single night, a mistake they both immediately regretted. Margaret went back to Harold the next day, and as far as Thomas knew, they had worked things out. "I transferred to a different office soon after," he said. "I didn't know Margaret was pregnant when I left. I didn't know anything until years later when I ran into an old colleague who mentioned Harold Mitchell and his teenage son. Something about the timing made me wonder, but I never pursued it. I had my own life by then, marriage, kids, a career. And if Harold was raising the boy as his own, who was I to interfere?" "Did you ever see Daniel?" Emma asked. "Before Dad came to you?" Thomas nodded. "Once by chance. At a baseball game in Boston about 20 years ago. I recognized Harold in the stands, and there was Daniel beside him, a young man by then. The resemblance was unmistakable. That's when I knew for sure, but I kept my distance. It seemed like the right thing to do." Emma sat back, trying to absorb it all. Thomas Ryder wasn't some villain who had abandoned his son. He was just a man who had made a mistake and then respected the boundaries set by the man who had chosen to be Daniel's father. "Daniel thinks his whole life has been a lie," Emma said. "He feels betrayed by everyone, Mom, Dad, and now me for keeping it from him, even though I only just found out myself. Would it help if I spoke to him?" Thomas asked. Emma considered this. "I don't know. Maybe. Or it might make things worse. He's still processing everything." They talked a while longer, with Thomas sharing stories from his own life, His career as an engineer, his marriage to a woman named Elaine who had passed away 10 years earlier, his 2 daughters who now lived on the West Coast. He showed Emma photos of his family, and she couldn't help noticing how much Daniel resembled Thomas's daughters around the eyes and jaw. As she prepared to leave, Thomas handed her a letter. "I wrote this after your father visited," he said, "in case Daniel ever wanted to know me. Please, give it to him if you think it might help." Emma tucked the letter into her purse, thanked Thomas, and headed back to her car feeling both heavier and lighter than before. She now had a more complete picture, but she still had no idea how to reach her brother. She was halfway back to Boston when her phone rang. It was Natalie. Emma pulled over to answer. "Emma? It's Daniel," Natalie said, her voice strained. He's not doing well. He's been drinking, and I'm worried. He keeps saying he has no family, that he doesn't belong anywhere." Emma's heart clenched. "Where is he now?" "Still at the cottage. He's out on the dock. I thought maybe if you came." "I'm on my way," Emma said, already turning the car around. "I'll be there in an hour." The sun was setting by the time Emma pulled up to the family cottage in Cape Cod. It was a simple wooden structure on stilts, weathered by decades of salt air and summer storms. She spotted Daniel immediately, a lone figure sitting at the end of the dock, feet dangling over the water. Natalie met her at the car, her face drawn with worry. "He's been out there for hours," she said. "He won't come inside." "Let me talk to him," Emma replied. Alone, she walked slowly down to the dock, the weathered boards creaking under her feet. Daniel didn't turn as she approached, though he must have heard her. Emma sat down beside him, not speaking at first. The water below them was dark, reflecting the first stars of evening. A half-empty bottle of whiskey sat between them. "Go away, Emma," Daniel finally said, his voice rough. "I'm not in the mood for another family revelation." "I went to see Thomas Ryder today," Emma said simply. That got his attention. Daniel turned to look at her, his eyes red-rimmed. "You what?" "I found his address in Dad's papers. I thought if I understood more, I might be able to help you understand too." Daniel laughed bitterly. "Understand what?" "That my life is a lie. That the man I thought was my father wasn't. That the name I've built my career on, the name on my business cards and office door, isn't even mine." "Your life isn't a lie," Emma insisted. "Dad was your father in every way that matters. He chose you, Daniel. He loved you from the moment you were born. But he didn't trust me with the truth," Daniel said, his voice breaking. "None of you did." "I didn't know until I found those papers," Emma reminded him gently. "And Mom and Dad, they thought they were protecting you. They made a decision when you were just a baby, and then the longer they kept the secret, the harder it became to tell." Daniel took another swig from the bottle. "So who is he? This Thomas Ryder? Some random guy Mom had a fling with?" Emma told him everything she'd learned, about Thomas's brief relationship with their mother, about his life since then, about how he'd respected Harold's role as Daniel's father. "He wrote you a letter," she said, holding it out. "After Dad visited him. He's kept it all these years, in case you ever wanted to know him." Daniel stared at the envelope but didn't take it. "I don't know if I want to know him," he said. "I don't know what I want anymore." They sat in silence for a while, watching the stars emerge above the water. "You know what I keep thinking about?" Daniel said eventually. "That summer when I was 14 and Dad taught me to sail. Remember? We took that little sunfish out every day for a week until I could handle it on my own." Emma smiled at the memory. "You capsized it like 5 times. 7. Daniel corrected with a faint smile of his own. "Dad never got frustrated, not once. He just kept helping me right the boat, showing me what I did wrong, letting me try again. He was a patient teacher," Emma agreed. "He was a good father," Daniel said, his voice thick with emotion. "DNA or not, he was my dad. And I've been so angry about this house, this inheritance, when the real inheritance was everything he taught me, everything he was to me." Emma felt tears spring to her eyes. "That's what I've been trying to tell you. You're still a Mitchell where it counts, in how you live, how you treat people, how you face challenges. That's what Dad passed on to you." Daniel nodded slowly. "I get why he left you the house now," he said. "He was trying to do right by everyone. By you, by me, by some biological connection I never even knew about. I'd share it with you," Emma offered. "The house. We could figure something out." Daniel shook his head. "No, the house is yours. The cottage." He looked around at the weathered building behind them. "The cottage feels right somehow. It's where we were happiest as a family, isn't it? No distractions, No work calls, just us and the water. He picked up the letter Emma had brought, turning it over in his hands. Do you think I should read this? I think that's up to you, Emma replied. But Thomas seems like a good man. Knowing him might help you understand parts of yourself. Or not. It's your choice, and whatever you decide, I'll support you. Daniel tucked the letter into his pocket. Not tonight, he decided. But maybe someday. He looked at Emma, really looked at her for the first time since she'd arrived. I'm sorry I shut you out, he said. When you told me, it was like the ground disappeared beneath my feet. I couldn't process it. I still can't, not fully. But it wasn't fair to blame you. We're still family, Emma said firmly. Nothing changes that. Daniel reached for her hand, squeezing it tightly. I may not be a Mitchell by blood, he said, but I'm still your brother. Always. Emma squeezed back, relief washing over her. Always, she agreed. They sat together on the dock until the stars were fully out, the water lapping gently against the pilings below them. The cottage behind them was just a silhouette now, a shadow against the night sky. But it was still standing, still solid, still there, just like the bond between them, tested but not broken. The inheritance their father had left them wasn't just buildings or money or even DNA. It was resilience. It was forgiveness. It was the capacity to face hard truths and still choose love. And as they walked back to the cottage together, Emma knew it was the most valuable inheritance of all. 2 weeks later, Daniel stood in front of his bathroom mirror in his Chicago apartment, adjusting his tie for the third time. The letter from Thomas Ryder sat on the countertop, its edges worn from being folded and unfolded repeatedly over the past 14 days. He'd read it so many times he practically knew it by heart. The careful, measured words of a man who respected boundaries but left a door open. I never sought to disrupt the life you built with Harold and Margaret, Thomas had written. But should you ever wish to know me, I am here. Natalie appeared in the doorway, watching him with concerned eyes. You don't have to do this today, she said gently. If you're not ready. Daniel met her gaze in the mirror. If I don't do it now, I might never work up the nerve again. He'd arranged to meet Thomas at a cafe in Boston, neutral ground for both of them. Emma had offered to come along for support, but Daniel had declined. This was something he needed to face alone, at least at first. The flight from Chicago to Boston felt interminable. Daniel spent most of it staring out the window, watching clouds drift beneath the plane, wondering how different his life might have been if his mother had made different choices all those years ago. If she'd told Thomas she was pregnant. If she'd married him instead of Harold. If she'd never met Harold at all. But those possibilities were like the clouds, ephemeral, insubstantial. The reality was the life he'd lived. The father who'd taught him to sail and help with his science fair projects. The mother who'd read to him every night until he was too old to admit he still enjoyed it. The sister who'd stuck by him even when he'd pushed her away. And now, Thomas Ryder. A biological connection he'd never known about, never missed, never questioned. Until suddenly, he had to. The cafe was busy when Daniel arrived, filled with the weekend brunch crowd. He spotted Thomas immediately, sitting at a corner table, reading a newspaper. The resemblance that Emma had mentioned was unmistakable. The way he held his head, the shape of his hands. Daniel felt a jolt of recognition at seeing features of himself in this stranger. Thomas looked up, sensing someone watching him. Their eyes met, and for a moment, neither moved. Then Thomas stood, setting aside his paper, his expression a mixture of hope and trepidation. Daniel approached the table, suddenly aware of his dry mouth, his racing heart. Mr. Ryder, he said, extending his hand. I'm Daniel Mitchell. Thomas took his hand, his grip firm but gentle. Daniel, he said, his voice rough with emotion. Thank you for coming. Please, sit down. They ordered coffee, neither touching the menus on the table. Daniel studied the man across from him, searching for more points of similarity, more evidence of their shared genetics. Emma told me you met with her, Daniel said finally. Thomas nodded. She's very devoted to you, he said. All she wanted was to help you understand everything. It's still hard to wrap my head around, Daniel admitted. Finding out at 42 that the man I thought was my father was your father, Thomas interrupted firmly. Harold Mitchell raised you, loved you, shaped who you are. Don't ever doubt that. Daniel was surprised by the conviction in Thomas's voice. You don't feel, I don't know, cheated somehow. Thomas considered this, stirring his coffee slowly. When Harold came to see me 5 years ago, I asked him the same question, he said. Why tell me at all, after all those years? He said he needed to make peace with the past before he died. And part of that was acknowledging that you have a right to know where you came from, even if he couldn't bring himself to tell you directly. He paused, his gaze distant. I was angry at first, at Harold, at Margaret, at myself for never following up on my suspicions. But then Harold showed me photos of you growing up. He told me about your achievements, your character, and all I felt was gratitude that you'd had such a good father, such a good life. But biologically, you're my father, Daniel said, testing the words, seeing how they felt in his mouth. Biologically, yes, Thomas agreed. But being a father is more than DNA, Daniel. It's showing up. It's teaching and supporting and sacrificing. Harold did all that. I didn't earn the right to be called your father. There was no bitterness in his tone, just a quiet acceptance that both impressed and puzzled Daniel. You never wanted to know me? To be part of my life? Thomas set down his spoon, meeting Daniel's eyes directly. Of course I wondered about you, especially after I glimpsed you at that baseball game. You might not remember it, but I've never forgotten. You were in your 20s then, with Harold and Emma. You were laughing about something, and I could see myself in your smile, in the way you leaned forward when you spoke. He smiled faintly at the memory. But you already had a family who loved you. Who was I to disrupt that? To force my way into your life based on nothing more than biology? He shook his head. That would have been selfish. Daniel felt something inside him shift slightly, a grudging respect for this man's restraint. Did you have other children? He asked. Thomas brightened. 2 daughters, Alexandra and Melissa. They live in California now. Alex is an environmental lawyer in San Francisco, and Missy teaches high school English in San Diego. He pulled out his wallet, showing Daniel photos of 2 women with familiar eyes. They're your half-sisters, Thomas said carefully. They don't know about you yet. I wanted to meet you first, to see if you were interested in knowing us at all. Daniel studied the photos, feeling a strange mix of curiosity and distance. These women shared his blood, but were complete strangers to him. I don't know, he said honestly. This is all still very new. Of course, Thomas said quickly. There's no pressure, no expectations. Just possibilities, if you want them. They talked for nearly 2 hours, moving from the basic facts of their lives to deeper subjects. Their shared interest in architecture, Thomas's career path that paralleled Daniel's in many ways, memories of New England that resonated with both of them. As their conversation wound down, Thomas hesitated, then pulled an envelope from his jacket pocket. I brought something for you, he said. Medical records, family history, things that might be important for you to know, health-wise. Daniel accepted the envelope, recognizing the thoughtfulness of the gesture. Thank you. And this, Thomas added, sliding a small box across the table. It belonged to my father, your grandfather, I suppose. He was an architect too, actually. Designed several buildings in Boston back in the 50s. Daniel opened the box to find an antique compass, its brass casing worn but gleaming. It's beautiful, he said, genuinely touched. He always said it helped him find his way, Thomas explained. I thought you might appreciate it, given what you're navigating now. As they said goodbye outside the cafe, Daniel found himself unexpectedly moved. This wasn't the dramatic confrontation he'd imagined, full of recriminations and regrets. It was quieter, more nuanced, 2 adults acknowledging a connection while respecting the complex emotions that came with it. I'd like to stay in touch, Daniel found himself saying. Not as father and son exactly, but maybe we could get to know each other better. Thomas's face lit up with a careful hope. I'd like that very much, he said. Take all the time you need. I'm not going anywhere. They shook hands again, and as Daniel watched Thomas walk away, he felt something loosen in his chest. Not forgiveness exactly, not yet, but a willingness to move beyond anger toward understanding. He pulled out his phone and called Emma. How did it go? She asked, the concern evident in her voice. Better than I expected, Daniel admitted. He's not what I imagined. In a good way? Daniel considered this. I think so. He respects that Dad was my father. He's not trying to replace him or claim some role he didn't earn. He paused. He showed me pictures of his daughters, my half-sisters, I guess. Wow, Emma said. How do you feel about that? Honestly, I don't know yet. It's like being handed a whole new branch of family I never knew existed. He hesitated. Speaking of family, Can I come by the house tomorrow? There's something I want to discuss with you. The next morning, Daniel sat with Emma in their father's study. The room felt different now, less a shrine to Harold Mitchell, more a space holding memories both complicated and cherished. I've been thinking about the house, Daniel said, and I have a proposal. Emma looked wary. What kind of proposal? I don't want to sell my half of Dad's investments, Daniel explained, but I'd like to use some of that money to renovate the cottage. Make it a year-round place, not just a summer home. Emma's expression softened. That sounds nice, but Chicago is your home. Your business is there. It is, Daniel agreed. But Natalie and I have been talking. I could open a satellite office here, split my time, be closer to you, to, he gestured around them. To all of this. My history, whatever shape it takes. Is this because of Thomas? Emma asked gently. Daniel shook his head. No, or not entirely. It's because of everything. Finding out about Thomas, yes, but also remembering what matters. Family. Connection. He met her eyes. I don't want to lose any more time, Em. We're all we've got now. Emma reached across the desk, taking his hand as she had on the dock. Not all, she corrected him. You have Thomas now too, if you want. And those half-sisters. Maybe, Daniel said, the possibility no longer filling him with dread. But you're my constant, Emma. The one person who's been there through everything. That's worth more than any house or cottage or inheritance. Emma smiled, tears gleaming in her eyes. So, renovations on the cottage, she said briskly, moving past the emotion. What are you thinking? Finally fixing that leaky roof. And just like that, they were planning, moving forward, finding their way together. Just as they always had, just as they always would. Autumn painted the trees surrounding the cottage in brilliant oranges and reds as Daniel supervised the construction crew. What had started as simple renovations, fixing the roof, updating the plumbing, had evolved into something more ambitious. The cottage was being winterized, expanded with a small office overlooking the water where Daniel could work remotely. Windows were being enlarged to capture more of the view, and the old wood-burning stove was being replaced with a proper heating system. The insulation goes here, Daniel instructed, pointing to the exposed beams. We need to make sure it's properly sealed against those winter winds. The contractor nodded, making notes on his tablet. Should be done before Thanksgiving, Mr. Mitchell. Weather permitting. Daniel smiled at the name, Mr. Mitchell. He decided not to change it, despite knowing what he now knew. As Thomas had said, Harold Mitchell had earned the right to be his father. Keeping the name felt like honoring that. His phone buzzed with a text from Emma. Don't forget dinner tonight. 7 p.m. And yes, I'm making your favorite lasagna. Daniel texted back a quick confirmation before turning his attention back to the renovations. The past 3 months had settled into a new rhythm. He spent 2 weeks in Chicago, then 2 weeks in Cape Cod, balancing his business responsibilities with this newfound commitment to family. Natalie had been supportive, though he knew the constant travel wasn't easy for her. They were discussing the possibility of her transferring to a Boston hospital for at least part of the year. As for Thomas Ryder, they'd established a cautious friendship. They met for lunch every few weeks, slowly building a relationship that acknowledged their biological connection without trying to force a father-son dynamic that would have felt artificial to both of them. They discovered shared interests beyond architecture, a love of jazz, a preference for historical fiction, an inability to resist a good scotch. Thomas had offered to help with the cottage renovations. He'd retired from engineering, but still had a keen eye for structural issues. But Daniel had politely declined. He wasn't ready to blend those worlds quite yet. The cottage was Mitchell family territory, sacred in its own way. Later that evening, Daniel drove to the family home in Boston, where Emma was hosting a small dinner party. She'd settled into the house beautifully, making subtle changes that respected their father's memory while establishing her own presence. Fresh paint in the living room, new curtains in the dining room, her books mingling with their father's on the shelves. When he arrived, he was surprised to find her in the kitchen with a young man he didn't recognize, tall, with glasses and an easy smile, helping Emma chop vegetables. Daniel. Emma greeted him with a hug. This is Mark. Mark, my brother Daniel. The architect, Mark said, wiping his hands before shaking Daniel's. Emma talks about you all the time. Daniel raised an eyebrow at his sister, who blushed slightly. Mark teaches English at Boston University, she explained. We met at a faculty mixer last month. Nice to meet you, Daniel said, studying the man who was clearly more than just a casual acquaintance. He hadn't seen Emma with anyone since her divorce 3 years earlier, and it was good to see her smiling, relaxed in someone's company. The dinner was pleasant, the conversation flowing easily between architecture, literature, and Emma's research in art history. Watching his sister laugh at something Mark said, Daniel felt a wave of gratitude. Despite everything, the revelations, the upheaval, the redrawing of family lines, here they were, moving forward, building new connections. After dinner, while Mark helped Emma clean up in the kitchen, Daniel wandered into their father's study. He still thought of it that way, though Emma had added her own touches. A colorful throw over the leather chair, fresh flowers on the desk. The safe behind the painting had been emptied, its contents organized in folders in the bottom desk drawer. Daniel sat in the chair, running his hand over the worn leather armrest. So much had happened in this room. The reading of the will, the discovery of the documents, the unraveling of a lifetime of secrets. And yet, the room itself remained, solid and unchanging, a witness to their family's evolution. Emma found him there, leaning against the doorframe. "Penny for your thoughts?" Daniel smiled. "Just thinking about how much has changed. And how much hasn't." She came in, perching on the edge of the desk. "What do you think of Mark?" she asked, trying to sound casual. "He seems nice," Daniel said honestly. "Smart. Makes you laugh. Does he know about everything?" Emma shook her head. "Not yet. It's still new. But if things keep going well." She shrugged. "It's part of who we are now, isn't it? This complicated family history." "I suppose it is," Daniel agreed. "Speaking of which, Thomas invited me to Thanksgiving dinner. His daughters are flying in from California." Emma's eyes widened. "Are you going to go?" Daniel hesitated. "I'm considering it. He said I could bring you and Natalie, if we wanted." "Do you want me to come?" Emma asked carefully. "I think so," Daniel admitted. "Meeting his daughters, my half-sisters, feels like a big step. Having you there would make it easier." Emma reached over and squeezed his hand. "Then I'll be there." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the sounds of Mark loading the dishwasher drifting in from the kitchen. "I've been thinking about Mom a lot lately," Emma said finally, wondering if she ever regretted her decision, if she ever wanted to tell you the truth. Daniel had wondered the same thing. He'd spent hours trying to reinterpret memories of his mother through this new lens, looking for signs, hints, moments of almost confession. "I think she made the best choice she could at the time," he said slowly. "She loved Dad, and I think she wanted me to have the stability of a complete family, not be caught between two men who might have competed for my attention." "That sounds like Mom," Emma agreed. "Practical, protective." "I found some letters," Daniel continued, "in the cottage, tucked away in an old book. Letters Mom wrote to Dad when they were first dating. Before everything. She really loved him, Em. It wasn't just convenience or necessity. What they built together was real." Emma smiled. "I never doubted that. They had their struggles, like any couple, but there was always this foundation of respect between them. Even when they argued, they listened to each other." "I want that," Daniel said suddenly. "With Natalie. That kind of partnership that weathers secrets and illness and all the complications life throws at you." "You already have it," Emma pointed out. "She stood by you through all of this, didn't she?" Daniel nodded, thinking of how patient Natalie had been, how she'd given him space to process his anger without judgment, how she'd encouraged him to keep talking to Emma even when he'd wanted to shut everyone out. "We're thinking of trying for a baby," he said quietly. "Next year, once the cottage renovations are done and we've figured out our living situation." Emma's face lit up. "Daniel, that's wonderful." "Is it?" he asked, a trace of uncertainty in his voice. "Passing on these genes that I only just learned about?" "You're passing on yourself," Emma said firmly. "Your kindness, your creativity, your persistence. Those are the things that matter, not who contributed what DNA." Daniel smiled, feeling the rightness of her words. "When did you get so wise, little sister?" Emma laughed. "I've always been the wise one. You were just too busy being the successful one to notice." They were interrupted by Mark, who appeared in the doorway. "Sorry to interrupt," he said, "but it's getting late, and I have an early class tomorrow." "Of course," Emma said, standing up. "I'll walk you out." When she returned a few minutes later, her cheeks were flushed, and Daniel couldn't resist teasing her. "So, Professor Mark, huh?" Emma threw a pillow at him. "Shut up. He's nice." "He seems it," Daniel agreed. Dad would have liked him. The observation hung between them, weighted with all the things their father would never know, the people he would never meet, the family configurations he couldn't have imagined. I hope so, Emma said softly. Later, as Daniel drove back to the cottage, he thought about the upcoming Thanksgiving. Not the traditional Mitchell family gathering they'd always had, but something new. Thomas and his daughters. Emma, Natalie, perhaps even Professor Mark. A blended family created not by marriage but by truth, by choices made decades ago and choices being made now. The cottage came into view, its silhouette altered by the construction, its foundation the same. Like me, Daniel thought. Changed on the outside, solid at the core. His phone pinged with an email notification. It was from Alexandra Ryder, Thomas's older daughter. Daniel had given Thomas permission to share his contact information with her, but this was the first direct communication. Dear Daniel, it began. Dad told us about you a few weeks ago. It was a shock, as you can imagine, but also exciting. I've always wanted a brother. Missy and I are looking forward to meeting you at Thanksgiving, but I thought I'd reach out before then, just to say hello and to share some photos of our family that might interest you. Attached were several images. Thomas as a young man, standing proudly in front of what appeared to be his first engineering project. Thomas's parents, Daniel's biological grandparents, at their 50th wedding anniversary. Alexandra and Melissa as children, at beaches and birthday parties. The last photo wasn't old but recent. Thomas, Alexandra, and Melissa, taken just a few months ago on a hiking trip. The sisters had Thomas's eyes, Daniel's eyes. Their smiles were different, their builds more delicate, but there was no denying the connection. Daniel sat for a long time, looking at these strangers who were also, in some fundamental way, family. Then he began to compose a reply. Dear Alexandra, he wrote, thank you for reaching out. This is all still very new to me, but I'm looking forward to meeting you and Melissa at Thanksgiving. Here are some photos of my own that might interest you. He attached pictures of himself and Emma as children, playing at the cottage. A photo of Harold and Margaret on their 30th anniversary. A recent picture of himself and Natalie on the dock, the sunset painting the water gold behind them. As he sent the email, Daniel felt a sense of pieces clicking into place. Not perfectly, not completely, but enough to glimpse the shape of this new reality. A family expanded by truth rather than diminished by it. The cottage creaked around him, adjusting to its new dimensions, settling into its stronger foundation. Outside, the tide was coming in, the eternal rhythm of water meeting shore unchanged by the human dramas playing out along its edge. Daniel opened the back door and stepped out onto the newly reinforced deck, breathing in the salt air. Above him, stars pierced the clear autumn sky, constants in a changing universe. Like love, he thought. Like family, in all its complicated, beautiful forms. Thanksgiving arrived with a dusting of early snow that made Cape Cod look like a scene from a holiday card. Daniel stood in Thomas Ryder's kitchen, watching through the window as Emma and Alexandra chatted by the fireplace in the living room, their gestures animated, already comfortable with each other despite having met only hours earlier. They've hit it off, Thomas observed, appearing beside Daniel with a glass of wine. Alexandra's an art enthusiast too, not professionally like Emma, but she collects local artists' work whenever she travels. Daniel nodded, still processing the strangeness of being here, in this house, with these people who were simultaneously strangers and family. Natalie and Melissa seemed to be getting along as well, he noted, glancing toward the dining room where his wife was deep in conversation with Thomas's younger daughter. Medical shop talk, Thomas said with a smile. Melissa may teach English, but she volunteers at a health clinic on weekends. She's always been fascinated by Natalie's work in pediatric surgery. It had been Thomas's idea to host Thanksgiving at his Cape Cod home rather than in Boston, neutral territory, yet close enough to Daniel's cottage that it felt like a natural extension of his newly established routine. The invitation had come with no pressure, no expectations beyond a shared meal and the opportunity for his daughters to meet their half-brother. Daniel had agonized over whether to accept, changing his mind several times before Natalie finally said, "What's the worst that could happen? An awkward dinner? We've survived worse." She was right, of course. After everything, learning about his true parentage, confronting Emma, meeting Thomas, a potentially uncomfortable Thanksgiving dinner seemed manageable. and so far, it had been anything but uncomfortable. Alexandra and Melissa had greeted him with a warmth that surprised him. There were no dramatic declarations, no tearful embraces, just the genuine interest of two women meeting a new relative, finding points of connection without forcing artificial closeness. "Need any help with the turkey?" Daniel asked, glad for something practical to focus on. Thomas gestured to the oven. "Nearly done, but you could help me with the gravy if you don't mind." They worked side by side, Thomas measuring flour while Daniel stirred the drippings. It was oddly domestic, this collaboration, and for a moment Daniel found himself wondering what it might have been like to grow up with this man, to learn cooking alongside carpentry, to debate architectural theories over breakfast, to bring home report cards to this kitchen rather than the one in Boston. But the thought didn't sting as it once might have. Instead, it simply existed as one of many possibilities life could have taken, no better or worse than the path that had actually unfolded. Alexandra brought photo albums, Thomas said, breaking into Daniel's thoughts. "Family history going back 3 generations. If you're interested." Daniel hesitated only briefly. "I'd like to see them," he decided. "After dinner, maybe." Thomas nodded, not pushing. That was one of the things Daniel had come to appreciate about him. His patience, his willingness to let Daniel set the pace of their relationship. Dinner itself was surprisingly easy. The initial awkwardness melted away as they passed dishes around the table, complimenting the food, sharing stories that required no shared history to appreciate. Natalie talked about a challenging surgery she'd recently performed. Alexandra described an environmental case she was working on involving protected wetlands. Melissa had everyone laughing with tales of her high school students' creative excuses for late assignments. Emma caught Daniel's eye across the table, raising her glass slightly in a private toast. He returned the gesture, feeling a surge of gratitude for her presence, her steady support through all of this. "I'd like to propose a toast," Thomas said suddenly, standing with his wine glass. "To new beginnings and old foundations. To family in all its complex, evolving forms." They all raised their glasses, the simple sentiment capturing perfectly what this gathering represented. After dinner, while Thomas and Natalie cleared the table, Alexandra brought out the promised photo albums. She sat next to Daniel on the sofa, opening the first one to reveal black and white images of stern-faced men and women in early 20th century clothing. "These are our great-grandparents," she explained. "Thomas and Eleanor Ryder. He was an engineer too, worked on bridges all over New England." Daniel studied the faces, looking for traces of himself in these ancestors he'd never known existed. "You said there were 3 generations of Ryders in engineering?" Alexandra nodded. "Great-grandfather, grandfather, father. You're the 4th, technically, though you came to it independently." "Nature versus nurture," Melissa commented, joining them. "The eternal question." Daniel smiled. "Harold, my dad, was an English professor. Books everywhere in our house growing up. Emma followed in his footsteps with art history, but I was always drawing buildings, constructing elaborate forts. He used to joke that I was a changeling." The words hung in the air for a moment before Daniel realized their unintentional irony. But rather than creating tension, they broke something open. Alexandra laughed first, then Melissa, then Daniel himself, the absurdity of the situation suddenly striking all of them at once. "I guess he wasn't entirely wrong," Daniel said when he could speak again. "Not a changeling," Melissa corrected, "just a rider in Mitchell clothing." They continued through the albums, Alexandra and Melissa providing context for the photos, summer vacations in Maine, graduation ceremonies, holiday gatherings. Occasionally, Thomas would add a detail from across the room, but mostly he let his daughters guide Daniel through this visual history. "This was Dad's first major project," Alexandra said, pointing to a photo of a young Thomas standing proudly in front of a sleek office building. The Harborview Tower in Boston. It won an award for innovative sustainable design, pretty forward-thinking for the early 80s. Daniel leaned closer. "I know that building. I've admired it for years. I had no idea that your DNA helped design it." Melissa teased gently. "Something like that," Daniel admitted. As they neared the end of the albums, the photos became more recent. Alexandra's law school graduation, Melissa's wedding, though Emma mentioned quietly that she was now divorced, Thomas receiving an Engineering Society's Lifetime Achievement Award. The final pages held photos from the past few years, holidays, birthdays, casual gatherings. Normal family moments, unremarkable except in their absence from Daniel's life. "We've left these last pages empty," Alexandra said, turning to blank pages at the end of the album. In case you wanted to add some of your own photos. If that feels right." The gesture, simple, thoughtful, open-ended, touched Daniel deeply. "I'd like that," he said. "I have some from the cottage renovations you might enjoy." Later, as the evening wound down, Daniel found himself alone with Thomas on the back deck. Despite the chill, it was peaceful watching the moonlight play on the distant water, the conversation inside a muffled backdrop too. There's silence. "Thank you for today," Daniel said finally. "For making it easy. For not expecting too much," Thomas supplied when Daniel trailed off. Daniel nodded. "This whole situation could have been much more difficult. I had 40 years to come to terms with it," Thomas pointed out. "To figure out what my role should be or shouldn't be. You've had just a few months." They were quiet again, the only sound the rhythmic breaking of waves on the distant shore. "I wanted to ask you something," Daniel said after a while. "Natalie and I, we're thinking about starting a family. I was wondering about health history, beyond what you've already shared. Anything I should know, think about?" Thomas looked over, clearly moved by the question and its implications. "Nothing concerning," he said. "Typical issues. My father had high blood pressure, mother had arthritis. Good longevity overall. My mother lived to 92, sharp as a tack until the end." Daniel nodded, filing away this information, another piece of himself discovered, integrated. "You'll be a good father," Thomas said quietly. "You have the foundation for it, from Harold. The patience, the dedication, and perhaps some technical aptitude from you," Daniel added with a small smile. Thomas smiled back, the resemblance between them momentarily striking in the moonlight. "I'd like to think so." Inside, laughter erupted, Emma's distinctive laugh rising above the others. Daniel and Thomas turned to watch through the window as Natalie apparently finished telling a story, her hands gesturing dramatically while Alexandra and Melissa doubled over in amusement. "Family," Thomas said softly. "It's never what you expect, is it?" "No," Daniel agreed. "It's messy, eh? More complicated. But worth it." Daniel considered the scene inside. These people who were connected to him through various combinations of blood, choice, and circumstance. Emma, his sister through their mother, and through 42 years of shared history. Natalie, his wife, chosen and choosing every day. Alexandra and Melissa, half-sisters discovered late, but welcomed nonetheless. And Thomas himself, a biological father who had respected boundaries and earned a place in Daniel's expanded understanding of family. "Worth it," Daniel confirmed. When they returned to the cottage that night, Natalie went straight to bed, exhausted but happy. Daniel stayed up, sitting at his desk in the newly constructed office extension. The room still smelled of fresh paint and new wood, but it already felt like his space, a bridge between his Chicago life and this evolving Cape Cod chapter. He opened his laptop and pulled up the design he'd been working on for the past few weeks, plans for a small addition to Emma's Boston house, a studio where she could work on her art history research without taking over the dining room table. It was his Christmas gift to her, a way of acknowledging that they were both putting down deeper roots, investing in their shared future in New England. As he tweaked the design, he found himself incorporating elements that reminded him of both houses he'd grown up with, the elegant proportions of the Boston home, the cozy functionality of the Cape Cod cottage. A blend of influences, just as he himself was a blend. His phone buzzed with a text from Emma, "Made it home safe. Today was good, wasn't it?" Daniel typed back, "Better than good. Thank you for being there." A moment later, another text arrived, "Always. That's what family does." Family. The word had shifted in meaning over the past months, expanding to include more people, more complexities, more possibilities. Daniel had once thought of family as fixed, defined by the Mitchell name and the walls of their Boston home. Now he understood it as something more fluid, more resilient, a network of connections that could bend without breaking, adapt without losing its essential nature. He saved his design and closed the laptop, the cottage quiet around him except for the gentle sound of waves beyond the windows. Tomorrow, the contractors would return to finish the last details of the renovation. Next week, He'd fly back to Chicago for meetings, then return here for Christmas preparations. In January, he and Natalie would begin their tentative journey toward parenthood. Life moving forward, building on foundations both old and new. Daniel switched off the desk lamp and stood at the window for a long moment, looking out at the starlit bay. The same water had lapped at this shore when he was a child racing along the beach with Emma, when his father had taught him to sail, when his mother had read novels on the deck during peaceful summer afternoons. The cottage had changed. He had changed, but some things remained constant. The tide's eternal rhythm, the star's faithful return each night, the capacity of the human heart to expand, to forgive, to embrace complexity. Family, Daniel thought as he finally headed to bed. Not what he'd expected, but exactly what he needed: a place to belong, a history to honor, and a future to build. One choice, one day, one connection at a time.